Hi, everyone. I'm PRISCILLASTEPHAN here with Angella Johnson. Welcome to episode 4 of the Soul Fluent Leadership unofficial podcast. Today, we're going to talk about trauma-informed business practices. And I'm so delighted to be talking to Angella today because today, this is the Expand Your Freedom Healer series where I'm talking to people that I have personally worked with and who have helped me heal, step into my power. And Angela was my coach multiple times, including when I was really building out the foundational elements of Soul Fluent Leadership. She is a masterful business coach as well as wordsmith and has an uncanny ability to sniff out intuitively the deeper kind of questions and the deeper insights into what makes your body of work really shine and resonate with the audience that it's here to really serve and speak to. And Angela has been going through her own transformational evolution in business and in her own leadership, now adding a lens of trauma-informed knowledge to business, marketing, messaging, and now it's expanding not only from working with solo entrepreneurs, but also with organizations and teams to help them understand that they're not broken, that there's nothing to fix, that you don't need to lean into bro marketing, hype, social media ads, and funnels, and all the things to try to fix something that was never broken to begin with. Angela introduced me years ago there were two things that really opened me up to kind of a big sigh of relief. One, and both you helped me understand better, Angela. The first one was when you introduced your community to Beth Johnson and her alignment grid, when we finally got permission to realize that we did not have to market ourselves or buy into toxic kind of guru marketing that tells you that they know best and that makes you feeling ashamed and broken and just so confused and spinning. So giving us permission to trust that for most of us, we are here, at least in my audience, and I think yours, we're here to help people trust what they already know versus telling them what to do. And then when you brought in and began having this discussion, and now I'm so glad more people are talking about trauma and the impact that it has on business and on marketing, it's that added, oh, thank God, relief of, now I understand why marketing felt so hard. Now I can understand that visibility and willing and pushing myself to do and to post on social media every day, I can understand why that isn't necessary, why it didn't work, why it really caused triggers in me and eventual burnout and other things. So I'm really glad to dive into this topic because the Healer series is about shining light on topics that are really relevant and timely and top of mind for many of us, and providing practical insights, personal journeys and experience, and solutions that remind you know better than anyone else, you're good enough just as you are, and let's provide that extra wave of healing so that we can feel empowered to be ourselves as we lead our vision, our mission, our businesses, our teams, and so on. So that's a big introduction, but that's what we're talking about today. Hi, Angela.
I love it. I love it. Gosh, thank you for that. I'm so glad that you're having this conversation. And one clarification, you mentioned the name of the person who did the archetype alignment grid. Her name is Beth Grant. I think you said Beth Johnson because my last name is Johnson. So for those of you listening,
Sorry, it is Beth Grant. Yes, I know better.
So it's okay. But it's always important to name our teachers. And so for those of you,
Exactly.
looking for that source, it changed, like, that body of work completely changed my life. And I was so grateful to be certified in that for a number of years and bring it to people like you and other people, because it created a context of, I know I was feeling a certain kind of way when I would experience people's marketing in that, what she calls this guru, archetype type of coaching, but I didn't have the language or the context of why was this happening? What was happening? And more importantly, what do we do about it? And how do we do it differently? And that was really an introduction to, oh, okay, there is something here. It's not just me being, quote, uncoachable, which what I was told for years, like, you just need to if you do what I say, then you'll make money and you'll do all the things. It's like, but this doesn't feel Right. And again, I didn't have the language. So I'm really happy that you mentioned that because it was
A
very
lot of
impactful.
us are feeling this on different levels, right? What everyone's saying or telling us to do doesn't resonate for me. It actually makes me feel off or bad or wrong, or but then we try to but then somehow we turn inward to making ourselves wrong about it
Right.
versus maybe there isn't anything wrong. Maybe
Correct.
it's just, but then like you said, what can help us bridge there's something wrong, quote unquote, with me maybe,
Mhm.
to, oh, I understand what's really happening and I have room to make a better and more informed choice that works for me.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, and it's, with all these formulas out there, it is, they're designed, and I heard someone say actually this morning of, folks who are doing this, I don't think that they're bad people, but they're doing things that they've been told, and it's this regurgitated, and it's kind of that game of telephone, like you whisper into someone's ear and then they whisper it. And then by the time it gets all the way around, it's like, is that what I actually meant? Is that what I intended? And so who's to say whether people are, intentionally harmful? I do believe that there is intentional harm being done. But the key here is that there is a different way to do things. And one thing I wanted to mention too is like when you have that experience of, gosh, this just doesn't feel good, a really important question to ask yourself is, am I uncomfortable or is this misaligned? Because our intuition, at least mine anyway, I will feel uncomfortable and I will make up a whole lot of stories about that when if I actually just sit with the discomfort and ask myself some questions and be honest with myself, then I can start distinguishing between, oh, this is my growth edge. This is actually in alignment for me versus no, this is unethical. This is out of alignment. This is not the strategy that's meant for me. And it's really confusing and hard sometimes when you see, oh, well, it's working for that person. It should work for me, right? And we have to really apply our own gifts, our own strengths and goals. We might have completely different goals from other people that we're seeing quote the strategy or the formula or the whatever working for. And so there's just a lot of nuance but distinguishing, am I uncomfortable or is this misaligned for me? That is going to be a great guide for people. And that takes practice. It takes practice to sense that in your body and to trust that.
Yes. Thank you for that amazing question. I want us to dive right into the topics of,
Yeah.
I call it being the solution for ourselves and for others, right? Practicing trauma-informed business. I also want to touch upon resilience later and self-trust, I think. But let's talk about, here we are, solopreneurs. We want to do good, your audience and mine, where we see our businesses as a vehicle for justice, for equity, for doing good in the world, for empowering and inspiring people to be their best, right?
Mhm.
And along the way, with all this chatter and stuff, and I've seen it lately too, like with people go, God, I can hear this voice telling me that I should do it this way and I should do it this way, and it's paralyzing me. Like it really like gets it. How can we start to look at ourselves and business differently, and why does mindset really not work? Mindset work alone.
Yeah. So, gosh, so I hear this from a lot of people when I share this experience of, if there was a healing modality, I have likely tried it. If there is a self-help book, I have likely read it. There's a speaker, on some stage motivating us to change our life and create better habits. I've been to many, many, many of those workshops and events. And the thing that's missing from mindset work well, a couple of things are missing because I used to say this. And so this is part of why I'm so passionate about sharing this aspect as well. Is like, well, if I can do it, you can do it. And I really believed that at that time. But what I wasn't acknowledging was my own privilege. I wasn't acknowledging that I'm a mostly able-bodied individual, that I have, at the time of starting my business, for example, I had financial support from my spouse who took care of the household bills so I could build this dream. And so at the beginning, I wasn't having to contribute financially to the household. Now, was that a wise choice? No, that has since very much changed. But what I'm saying is I had a whole lot of privileges that I wasn't acknowledging. And so when I just look at any person, like, if I can do it, you can do it. Am I acknowledging their humanity? Am I acknowledging or even getting curious about what their lived experiences are? And so that's one aspect. And so this mindset work of, well, you just believe it and achieve it, right? It's just like, do affirmations, look at your eyes in the mirror and do those affirmations and feel it in your body. Okay, well, if that would have worked, then it should have worked by now because I had done that for years. And so I kept seeing this pattern over and over and over and over again. And so when I stopped hiring coaches for a short time and I hired a therapist, because I thought there is something else happening here and I cannot put my finger on it. And that's when I discovered, oh, holy crap, I have trauma. I didn't know that I had trauma. I didn't know that this trauma that I had gaslit, that I had spiritually bypassed, that I had used my toxic positivity of like, no, it's fine. Everything happens for a reason. I'm stronger because of it. Or I didn't have that bad of a childhood, or that wasn't that bad of an experience. I'm fine. I got over it. And I hear a lot of women, especially saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. It's okay. Is it though? Are you really fine? And so mindset work without acknowledging trauma, without acknowledging how our nervous system works and how beliefs are created and then perpetuated through our behaviors, patterns, and habits. Like mindset work is like the tip of the iceberg, but there's this whole other body of work to really be paying attention to of how did these experiences impact you. And so mindset work without being trauma informed, without acknowledging the impact of trauma on those things and how nourishing and healing our nervous system and healing that trauma, like that's where the magic really, and I say magic, I don't even love that word in this context because it's not this magic wand of just follow 3 steps and then boom, you'll be healed. It's not that linear. Healing is never a linear process, unfortunately. So that's my TED talk on mindset.
Thank you. That's so informative. And I know that when you and I talked a little bit several months ago in an interview that you had me support you with on your work, we talked about trauma. I think this notion that trauma is like a big thing that happens, but I think you distinguished it as trauma with a little t and a big T. Let's talk about what trauma is, and because sometimes we, like you said, we bypass thinking, oh, I didn't have all those things, so this can't really be about me,
Right.
or that's dumb or silly because I'm just strong and I'll just plow through that.
Right. So when I start having this conversation about trauma, I met with usually one of 3 reactions. One, people are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Trauma is for other people. It's for someone who's gone to war. It's someone who has been assaulted or experienced domestic violence. Like their mind goes to these catastrophic events, or someone who lived through a natural disaster. That's for other people. So it's very othering, and that's not me. And then there's a group of people who are like, I'm open to this, but I'm also scared because trauma is a really big word. And I don't want to get stuck in this dark abyss of unpacking my trauma. And it's not a safe place for me to go. And because we haven't normalized the conversation, we haven't normalized it. And so it's this taboo topic that people they might be open to, but there's this fear, which is understandable. Like I totally get that. And then there's this third group of people who have studied trauma, and then and there's this like, oh, finally someone else gets it, and then we can go into this deep dive about trauma, and it's a big deal, but it's an approachable topic. So I'm actually going to refer to an article that I recently wrote, and Katie Kurtz is a trauma informed educator, and so I'm going to use her words to define trauma. Trauma is a non-binary human response to an event or events or experiences that disrupts, threatens, or harms the safety, security, and stability of an individual, a group, a collective, and or a culture. So a couple things I want to highlight there. It could be a single event, it could be multiple events, but it's not just individual trauma. We're talking about group trauma, collective trauma, or an entire culture. And so I think that's an important aspect. She goes on to say it can occur acutely, as in one time, chronically, complex, systemically, historically, ancestrally, and or vicariously, meaning you can witness someone else have an experience and it can very much impact your nervous system. And so it's important to understand that that trauma is not the event itself, but the human response to that event. So another way that I'll say that is somebody has an experience, and we might in that moment think, well, this isn't really that big of a deal. But our body isn't able to complete what's called the stress cycle. So we're not able to actually really process that. And in the research that I did last year, what was so insightful was when someone had a hard experience, and if they were well resourced, meaning they had someone who acknowledged their experience, someone who they could talk to, someone who could normalize that experience and help them process that entire stress cycle, then that what could have been a very traumatic experience didn't have as much of a toll on that individual. But what we find is that people who they're not well resourced, and well resourced meaning maybe their emotional needs weren't met as a child. And that might sound like, well, that's not a big deal. What child has their emotional needs met? Well, if you're consistently never validated, let's fast forward to now, all of a sudden I'm supposed to be this entrepreneur and put my work out into the world, but I just can't figure out why I have imposter syndrome so deeply that it stops me every single time I put my body work out in the world. Well, it makes sense because there is a wiring that happened of who you are, your expression, your needs, your wants, your unique voice was never validated. And so when we start to look at this from just a human, like a human lens of there's a deep humanity within each individual, it's like these self-sabotaging behaviors have context and make sense. And judging ourselves for those things is not going to change anything. But having compassion for, oh, I can see why I would be doing this. I can see why I might think this way. I can see why I just push through and just make shit happen, because that can also be a trauma response. And so this is not about pathologizing, meaning, oh, well, you have this behavior, therefore you must have trauma. It's a much more individual conversation. But these are things to at least get curious about, starting with yourself first. I wonder why I'm doing the things I'm doing. Could it be I have had experiences that have altered the way I think about things, that have altered my behaviors, my beliefs, and therefore I just think it's my personality. But what it actually is a trauma response lived over decades. Anyway, I
Thank
could
you
go
for
on.
explaining that so beautifully. It's a beautiful, it's that human response that you said. It gave me, chills, and especially since the pandemic, we have, I think, I can speak for myself, but it's been my sense that we have also, in addition to everything else that we might have collected in terms of trauma, felt more closely, both individually and collectively, the impact of seeing people dying, of anxiety going up, feeling terrorized, seeing collectively. I don't think in my lifetime, I've never been in a situation where I think everyone has had some form of a trauma or some issue or human, intense, severe response around the pandemic, right? Whether it happened more directly to us or with people that we love or that we know.
Right.
And so it was quite a intense experience, which I think is bringing to light even more the impact that events can have on our nervous system,
Right.
and give, and really to speak grace to our nervous system, and to our bodies. And I think when we can try, for me at least, to have reverence and gratitude for our bodies, for all that it is still able to hold and process,
Right.
from all our lifetime. It's amazing that it's still here. Heart's still beating, brain's still functioning, lungs are still processing oxygen, and we're still here and moving forward. So let's talk about the 4 core themes of how trauma impacts business owners.
Yeah. So I want to give some context to this and really also be very clear what my scope of practice is. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a trauma educator. I'm not a trauma-informed expert. I've taken several trainings about being trauma-informed. And then in grad school last year, I did research around how trauma impacts business owners. And so the whole research project started because I'm a professional of communications. master's program, and it was about trauma-informed communication. And when I started looking at that research study, it's like, actually, I want to go deeper. My heart is with entrepreneurs. I've been in this world for 15 years. And so this is based on the research of interviewing 14 individuals. I'm adding to that. And people might think, well, 14 individuals, that's not very much. And what is surprising to me is in qualitative research, what you do is you go until you reach what's called saturation. And that saturation point is when you're not seeing any new themes emerge. And so I am scheduled to do some additional interviews, but the second round of interviews, and this is where I want to add this context, was with mental health professionals, trauma educators, therapists. I said, here's what I'm finding in the research. And I checked it with 5 individuals, and they all said, these are the exact things that we see in our practice. So there was nothing out of the norm or so I just wanted to give that context. And so I'm going to actually just refer to my notes really quickly so I get this correct. So there were really 4 core themes that I saw. And when the question was, so the people I interviewed, they were aware that they had experienced trauma. They self-identified with that. They'd been in business for at least 3 years. And so they were paying attention to, this is not just my mindset, or I just need a new strategy. They were being like very aware of like, there's something happening habitually, and I've got to look at this. And it's through that lens of trauma. And so the 4 themes are perfectionism, self-worth and value, fear of rejection, and fear of visibility. And so that perfectionism can be this like hyper drive of like, I have to just go, go, go. And so we see a lot of that in this almost like a fight trauma response of like, I'm just going to keep going and keep pushing. It can also be a fawn trauma response of I have to have everything perfect. Everything has to be great. And so what that could look like, for example, and I would see this, and this is over years of working with entrepreneurs, but when I would help someone, for example, launch their website, so we'd do like the visual brand and actually build the pages and get all the words right. There would be, in every single case, this like chapter of the live launch of this website, that everything would get super complicated. The person would go, oh, it's not good enough yet. I have to tweak this and tweak that. And there's beauty in and value in, I want this to be great when I share this with the world. But then when it crosses over to that edge of it's never going to be good enough, that's where that perfectionism can show up. And so it just makes sense of like, based on previous experiences, that if I'm not perfect, then it's actually not safe for me to put this out into the world. So that's just one example of perfectionism.
Yes. So it was perfectionism. I think I missed the second one, and then fear of rejection and visibility.
Yeah. So perfectionism, self-worth and value is the second theme. The third theme is fear of rejection. And then the fourth theme is fear of visibility.
Would it be helpful to talk a little bit more about each of the other ones? Would you like that?
Yeah, let's do. So in the self-worth and value, a lot of the things that came up with that were things around money. So undercharging, over-delivering, sometimes even overcharging, so then nobody would want to work with them. And then they were safe because like, well, no one's going to find out that I'm a fraud. That came up in several interviews. Questioning the validity of your work, doubting your abilities. So all of those things, like I would put imposter syndrome, fraud factor, definitely in that category of just really questioning your self-worth and your value. And then fear of rejection, that looks like, and I would really relate with this one, of this debilitating self-doubt of like, and I'll use myself as the example, and this is part of what got me really curious about, I noticed that this keeps happening. I would get ready to launch something, and this would even happen when I would have hundreds of people registered for one of my live events when I used to do like multi-day live events. About 2 days before, I would honestly have this conversation with myself of, this is going to suck. I just need to cancel the event, refund everyone's money, and not put anyone through this. And I was like, what? And I would literally think about canceling an event with hundreds of people flying in, like what's happening, and every single event that would happen. And so I just started looking forward to that of like, oh yeah, 2 days before, I'm just going to have this total meltdown, total freak out. It's fine, I'll just move through it. But then there became that point of, this is exhausting, because on the days before hosting an event when I should be being grounded and getting rest and sleep, I would be frantically trying to figure things out, talking, like giving myself the pep talk and total breakdown mode. I would pull myself together, have this an amazing event, but then go through that cycle every single time. So that's just one example. The fear of rejection also can look like avoiding marketing and other behaviors or actions in your business. So you just avoid the rejection altogether. So that's fear of rejection. And do you have anything you would add there? Any clarifications with the fear of rejection?
No, I
Piece?
have a clarifying question, but not to these.
Okay. And then fear of visibility is a lot of times that shows up as unclear messaging or the inability to really get the words just right. And so that can cross over in perfectionism. You see how these are not separate things. There's an overlap with all of these things. Avoiding the marketing, again, that can also be fear of rejection, but just the fear of putting yourself out there and then making very logical reasons of why you shouldn't do things. Oh, I need another certification. I don't have enough expertise yet. So just be noticing when you feel stopped or blocked in your business, we want to go deeper of, what is this really about? And one of my questions that I'd love to ask is, what does my nervous system need to feel safe here? And that's a very different question of what other strategy do I need to spend money on, or how much harder do I need to work? But when we actually stop all that kind of thinking and go back to what does my nervous system need to feel safe here, that will really give us some great clues as far as what's happening on a nervous system level that's creating that behavior and pattern.
Yes, I'm just writing that. So you've alluded to this a little bit. So let me just go back. So perfectionism, self-worth and value, fear of rejection, fear of visibility. It can sometimes for me, it helps to listen, repeat it.
Yeah.
But I want to ask the question here of how can we distinguish if it's really a trauma perhaps caused response versus, I'm really not getting my message out there because I don't know, for example, I don't know the words to say. I feel kind of dumb and unclear. So how can is there a way to help distinguish that?
Really great question. So the way to, and again, I'm not the trauma expert, but this is what I've noticed, and based on the research and working with clients for 15 years, these are the patterns I saw over and over again, is what you're looking for are the habitual patterns. Like if it's a one-time thing, okay, there's a learning edge, there is a growth edge there, because sometimes we are just missing a skill set. Learning how to have a sales conversation. Yeah, was there maybe some trauma there? Absolutely. And I would say more often than, or more than that, it was, I just did not have the skill set of how to ask people for money. So I had to be trained and learn how to do that. So there's a skill set of when we start a business that you will be improving your skills, and there's going to be natural nervousness, maybe some hesitation, naturally. That just makes sense. But what we're looking for is, dang it, this thing keeps happening. Every single time I'm about to send that email, or every single time I'm about to go pitch myself for a podcast, or every single time I say I'm going to send regular newsletters and I don't. Like, we want to look for what are the habits, and then be paying attention to. And this is a practice too. Like when people talk about like your nervous system, I'm like, what do you mean? I don't get it. I do not understand it. I always felt super clinical and I just didn't get it. It was like people were speaking in a different language. And so a lot of that is really building up your own awareness and education of what does this mean? What do these terms look like? Am I at least willing to get curious about these things rather than, and this is where a lot of times people are like, I'm just going to hire the next coach. I'm going to just try the next thing. I'm just going to work harder. And it's like, if after you've tried all of those things and those habits, those sabotaging behaviors are still happening, then you might want to get curious about, I wonder how my body is holding on to trauma that's manifesting itself in this particular behavior. And so again, not approaching it, oh, well, great, I've got trauma. I'll put it this way. I have yet to meet a person who doesn't have trauma. I can't 100% say that every single person on the planet has trauma. I mean, I don't know how we can escape being a human on this planet, without experiencing trauma, even generational or ancestral trauma. Like epigenetics is showing us over and over again of, yeah, what our ancestors experienced, we're holding that in our bodies. And so it might not even be something that you experienced, but it might be something that, oh, this is just the way my family does things. This is just the way we do things. Is it, or is that trauma that has influenced and impacted those behaviors generation after generation after generation?
Yes, I've
So
seen
I
it.
want a bigger
I
answer.
love that. Thank you so much. I think it's so important to distinguish, right? Because, and it's funny because I remember just as I was starting my business, but even as we move into different levels of our evolution, there is that kind of parallel between we are learning or refining or elevating skills, right? Even if you like,
Right.
if you're learning sales, right? And then let's say you're just really learning that skill. And then you're like, oh, then at the same time, you're like, there's the discomfort of learning something new and, being uncomfortable with something. Then coupled with, oh, and I'm realizing that my entire body wants to go shut down, run away, do all the things. It can feel very intense. For me, what I noticed is I began to pay attention to the sensations and the feelings in my body. It could be literally a gut punch, a sinking feeling, a feeling of feeling defeated, hyper anxiety. Like I couldn't, a lot of which would reflect in doing more, getting just just speeding up a wheel more and more and more,
Yeah.
and just feeling this. I called it, kryptonite. The self doubt was so genuinely debilitating that
Mhm.
no amount of striving, pushing, doing, and the perfectionism in the beginning was like, oh my God. I would feel so excited because I was doing all the things, getting the pages, and then the moment that I had to switch from behind the scenes to putting it in front of people, my entire energy wobbled. I began to feel like I was on some kind of high in a really weird state. And it was just like, I literally thought, what's wrong with me? There's something, I'm clearly not cut out for this.
Mm.
Mind wise, I think many of us are so smart, right? We have graduate degrees, we've done all the things, we push through. So it's like, how can I be this smart, this talented, this
Mhm.
devoted, and feel like such a shit, a
Right.
failure, broken, whatever, fill in the blank?
Yeah.
That was devastating
Mhm. Mhm.
because I couldn't will, push, do, outlearn, or any of it. So then you're like, well, now what?
Yes. Yes. I wanted for people who are listening to this, I want to just actually slow things down for just a few moments. And you might have some things showing up for you of like, oh my God, I might be relating to this conversation in a way that I maybe didn't recognize what was really happening. And so this question of now what? And I just want to really like validate and echo what you're saying. Like there was this moment, and that's when I started really looking at like, what the hell is going on? I am a smart person. I have done so much self-development. I have spent over $300,000 on freaking coaches. Like I should know how to get over these hurdles. And yet I kept finding myself, you described it so, brilliantly of like this debilitating self-doubt. And so my trauma response was I would go into freeze mode and I didn't understand that was a trauma response. I always knew about fight or flight. Okay, great. Well, I'm not fighting and I'm not, fleeing, but no, I would just completely shut down. I would get sick. I would have very legitimate things show up in my body that would prevent me from moving forward. And in my experience, I can't say that this is what's happening for anyone else. For my experience, it was my body's way, my nervous system doing its brilliant job of keeping me safe. And so to answer this now what question, if anyone else has that question, which is like, that's the question that we all get to of like, great, there might be trauma, there might be this, but what the hell do I do with this? Awareness is the first key. Like being aware of these things. And awareness is not about judging the hell out of yourself. Oh, I can't get my shit together. Like, what the hell's my problem? Like, the self-talk that I have given myself over years is heartbreaking. I would never talk to anyone the way I talked to myself for decades. not having a clue that what was actually happening was my body's and nervous system's brilliance of keeping me safe. It just didn't get the message that it was okay to be safe in new areas, right? And so that awareness is the first key. And this is about the time when people want the checklist. Just tell me how to heal trauma. Tell me how to quote, fix my nervous system. It's not a linear path. Every individual is going to be different. Everyone is different. But awareness is the first key. And when you start having that awareness, you start looking at, oh, this experience or these habits, these patterns, behaviors have altered my perception of myself, of what's possible, of what I think I can do. And just having the space and being willing to sit in that space and just be aware of it is really, really important. And what I would add to that awareness is just be willing. You might not even know how to do this because our habits as a human is really just about judging the hell out of ourselves. But just be willing to have more compassion. Get curious about, instead of, why does this keep happening? I'm such an idiot. Versus that conversation of, I wonder what my body and my nervous system are wanting right now. Like, I just wonder. I wonder what experience my body's held on so tightly that has made this feel really difficult. And notice just the shift in the energy of what the hell's my problem versus awareness and compassion. And also adding some curiosity in that. And that will start unraveling the things that have been so tight. And what I will also say at this time is, if you have complex trauma or acute trauma, then I would highly recommend, to your best of your ability, is getting professional support. And I also just want to acknowledge, like, that takes a whole lot of privilege. It takes financial resources, time resources. So I don't say that of just like, oh, just go find a therapist. Like, I know that it's not that easy. And so it might take some time. But when you start giving yourself the opportunity to get support, I find that that very act can start calming down the nervous system of like, oh, I don't have to do this myself anymore. Like, I don't have to do this all alone. I can do this. And it might take time. We might have to get creative. It might be in starting with reading books, checking things out from the library. Social media has some great content out there, but just be aware of, there's some really brilliant marketers who just happen to read a book. They're not trauma informed. They have no business telling you how to heal trauma. Like, go to legit resources, do a little bit, do your due diligence. So the now what question is totally valid. And I think that's where the bulk of our work comes in as a practitioner of, how do we heal our trauma? And it's an ongoing experience.
I would 100% agree with that. And for me, the shift that created the opening was this understanding that my body and nervous system were wired for my safety, and it has not been the enemy holding me back from all these things. This is what was required. This is how it operates at its optimal intelligence and capacity. So realizing that the body and the nervous system were my partners, even though it felt like the enemy that was holding me back from all of that, would give me permission to not blame it or be angry with it, but then to really see it as a true ally and partner and companion, and see its true role. And then say, okay, then we can partner up together on this ride. And it's funny because I wrote here on my little post-it, you can't read it, just before we met, relief and sadness, because once I heard the understanding a bit of trauma, that all of a sudden it cracked open that I wasn't broken. It was massive relief. Mm-hmm. And heartbreaking, devastating sadness, grief.
Yes.
Over the hundreds of thousands of dollars that could have been earned, over the impact that could have been made. I mean, it's not about regretting and living in the past, but there came grief, as well as an opening of, oh my God, now what's possible at the same time. So it was two sides of that coin. I want to talk, we have limited time here, but I want to talk very quickly for people that are really beginners around the 4 responses. What is it? Fight, flight, fawn, and what's the other one?
Freeze.
Freeze. So can we just very quickly just say, like, these are, how we can start to notice some of the responses that we have with trauma?
Yeah, I'm going to refer to something because again, I'm not the trauma educator, but I will say also, I just wrote an article. I've had it looked at by 2 trauma-informed educators. They both have given their thumbs up. And so if you go to angellajohnson.com and look for trauma on my blog, then it's a very long blog post, but it will actually help with how do you define trauma? What does trauma-informed even mean? What is trauma-informed marketing and messaging? How I define it. And it'll also give you a visual of the 4 trauma responses. So that's what I'm referring to right here. Let me just go to the right place. So, when we think about fight, the fight response, and when you think about getting into just a conversation or an argument with somebody who has that fight response is like, they are very argumentative, they're very defensive. I find that there's a lot of proving energy. And so in entrepreneurship and business, that proving energy can be like, well, my stuff is the best and don't you dare question it. And there's this this abrasiveness almost. And what they're doing is they're like, they are ready to fight and defend who they are, their body of work. Like that's just one example. Another example of a fight response could be overworking. Like you were just going to push yourself and just go, 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 go. So that could be a fight response. What I'll also say is these do not belong in these silos, right? Oh, well, this is just a fight response. There's crossover. There are things that are so interlinked and interconnected that it's really hard to just pull them apart. And so rather than maybe getting swept up of like, what kind of a trauma response am I having? And getting it perfect, which could be perfectionism, right? But be open to just how it's like the sensation, just noticing. And it is helpful to have language so that we can identify it, but don't get stuck in getting the perfect language or the perfect definition, because this knowledge grows and expands as your awareness expands. So I wanted to just share that to give people permission. Just awareness is the first key. Just notice, wow, I just kind of feel, and see if you can describe that sensation in your body. Because the more you start paying attention to the body, and you said this so perfectly, Priscilla, then your body can be your ally instead of this thing that gets in your way. So that's the fight. So flight is, this is the pattern that I identified for myself and many people, is the constant creation of new things, but never marketing it. And so you just you create it, but you run away. You create it, but you run away. And I kind of joke about it because I'm really good at that. And part of that, and this is the other thing too, is part of this could be neurodivergence. Part of this could be your personality. Part of this could be you're extremely creative. So not everything has to be a trauma response. And the more I'm seeing this, I'm really seeing trauma at the root of many things. But this is about you identifying what feels true for you and not saying, well, I've got trauma or someone else has trauma. It's just important to not try to diagnose yourself or someone else, but be aware. You avoid the uncomfortable things. Like for years, I avoided accounting and bookkeeping. I would run away from it. And and that was definitely a trauma response. Like my body would get the hell out of that space. I would not even engage with it. The freeze response could look like confusion, indecision, feeling stuck, like I'm just stuck, I can't quite move, and there's this freeze response. Hopelessness is another common thing that entrepreneurs described as that freeze response. And then the fawn response, this is the one that was the most fascinating to me because and all of the things that I've read and researched, it's newer and it's becoming more well-known, but it's the people pleasing. And there was somebody on social media, I will find the link and I'll give it so you can have it in the show notes, but they were talking about how in these aggressive, high pressure sales, what's actually happening is the person who's selling is activating a person's fawn response, and that person's saying, yes, sure, I'll buy it. But inside they're like, wow, this is so awful. But then that salesperson is saying, well, that's just your fear. You've got to bust through the fear. But what's really happening when that person, especially when they say yes, they're wanting to be liked. They're wanting to be approved of, they're wanting to be included. And so those are all things that can be considered the fawn response. I find a lot of like spiritual bypassing, toxic positivity, kind of like, no, 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 it's fine, it's fine. The world is fine. Everything is perfect. Well, are you in the world? Like, have you looked around? Like, how can you not acknowledge systemic oppression? How can you not acknowledge these things? Like, things are actually not fine, so that I look at as a really great fawn trauma response.
They're beautiful. So was there another one? So fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. We got them all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And as I began to notice, this is just kind of a generalization. I noticed that I would go into fighting mode in business and in fawning. I would just collapse into the spiral of, I'm not good enough. This is never going to work. I can't seem to, the world's against me. And then fighting, push, 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 push.
Yep. Yep.
I want to speak really quickly to under-earning, chronic under-earning, and the highs and lows around money, because I think that I'm convinced that there must be a trauma response. That's been my experience for a very long time. And you've probably heard me say, I've hit an income ceiling and I've plateaued and I cannot seem, like I magically have a number. And every year without realizing, I get right there and I don't surpass it.
Yep. Yep.
And not too long ago, my husband very compassionately and with genuine curiosity said, why can't you just make more money? Why can't you make money? And that was both crushing and eye-opening, because just reading books about money, like it would still bring up all this resistance and all these things. And it's been really fascinating as I've dived a little bit more into this experience around money, my relationship to money. I've noticed how much there's a love and hate of it, how much my connection to money is related to the decisions my father made, and how my perception of money and being a business owner, money is evasive, it's reckless, it's not friendly. I just really that excavation that I hadn't even felt ready. And I think this is important to acknowledge, that you can trust or take your time to see if you're really ready to acknowledge some of these things for your nervous system. And I wasn't up until now. And doing this excavation has been fascinating. And I'm doing it oddly with a grief recovery specialist, with Susie, who's in episode one. Episode one, we talk about good grief and how there's over 40 different kinds of grief in our life. It's like, just like with trauma, it's not just, when you lose money, you lose opportunities, you lose your pet. I mean, there's so many ways, and the grief recovery method is a great book to work with that. But as I'm excavating my grief around my sense of self and lost opportunities and money and inheritance and all these things, it's been fascinating to see that perhaps if you have been seen patterns with money too, that might be both generationally informed, culturally informed, and also just from your own background as well. Because to just will your way to make more money or just do all the strategies and read all the books, if you're just not moving through, maybe there's something else.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And you mentioned also like culturally, family, like generational trauma. And I'm going to say this, and I can just hear all like the spiritual communities saying, no, you can change it. You can. And that's the beautiful thing is trauma. You can heal this. Like it's like, this is not a death sentence. This is not, you're not stuck with this, but it takes acknowledgement of it comes from multiple places culturally. I mean, when we look at capitalism, and capitalism is not about making money. Capitalism is the exploitation of people in order to make a profit. So let's get clear about when I say capitalism. And we look at all of these structures upholding capitalism. Why, I read something today of 15% of Canada's population has food insecurity, meaning they do not have access to food. Meanwhile, the major grocer, food provider, they're, billions of dollars in profit. And so we look at what's happening systemically, look what's happening in our own backyard. And it's like, these things are real experiences. And I think the key with all of this is rather than blaming yourself of like, oh, why can't I just make more money? Why can't I just do this? It's pausing and just going, yeah, and acknowledging all of the things that you are overcoming, all of the generational cycles that you are healing and shifting, the things culturally that are happening. Like there are so many things, and it's not about overwhelming yourself with, oh my God, I've got to figure my way out of all these things. There's this sacred acknowledgement of, oh, yeah, it would make sense of why I might struggle with this. And when we can start having that compassion, that is what starts changing things. But the more we keep judging ourselves and blaming ourselves, because that's the other thing about trauma, it's a cycle of self-blame. And once we really start breaking those cycles, then instead of blaming ourselves all the time, we can start asking questions of like, oh, well, wait a minute, this system or the way money has been flowing, or the way I've been marketing, or the services I've been engaged in, or how I've been in my relationships, like we can start acknowledging those things and start shifting the patterns. And I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I'm really happy that you mentioned, that money piece. But it's just like it really keeps coming back to what could shift and open up for you, what could be healed if you approached whatever that pattern, behavior, that thing that really is pissing you off, or the thing that's just really hard and hurtful and damaging, like approaching that with some compassion. Like that again starts unwinding everything that has been bound so tightly of, well, this is just the way it is. You have to keep working harder. If working hard was the antidote, then we would be in a very different world right now. Working harder is not the answer.
It isn't. And I want us to get to the rapid fire section, but I want to touch really just for a minute, the topics of resilience that came up for me as an aha during the interview that we had on trauma, is that what I found was that some of the greatest assets that can help us to navigate trauma events is our incredible sense of resilience, right? We are strong. We know we're capable. We know that somehow we just get through things. We just even deeper and keep going, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also in business, that can have a positive and a negative effect, in that sometimes we just keep going to our detriment of burnout, autoimmune disease, burning down our relationships, our life, our sense of joy. And I made a pact with myself when I started in health coaching 12 years ago. I will surrender and give up my life for success. Once I make six figures, then I can go have a life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I hear that, I can't believe, but it was success because I needed to prove that I was worthy so that I would be okay, so that I could be accepted, so that I could, survive. And then you had made a comment somewhere in one of your Instagram posts that I'd love you to clarify, because I know that for us, as people that are here to create safe spaces for people to trust their inner knowing and that inner voice and that intuition, you also mentioned something around how self-trust, we can just say, oh, just trust yourself. But how can we embrace that element of, well, that's not always easy when you've experienced trauma and your nervous system has kind of taken a beating?
Right. Well, and we also look at conditioning of every single, I have again yet to meet an individual that was born into this amazing family of like, just trust yourself. Like what you know in your body is the truth. It doesn't matter what I as the parents say, it doesn't matter what educators say, what politicians say, government says, teachers, and so we're conditioned from very, very young to actually not trust ourselves. If people were raised in a religion, like there's always someone outside of you who knows better for you. And they're usually, we're usually a man. There's usually some dude, some white dude, like at the seat, saying, well, this is how the world works, right? So we really trace it back. So I won't go on my patriarchy, smash the patriarchy TED talk right now, but just acknowledging like we're actually not born into systems, cultures, communities. And most of us, like indigenous cultures, very much is the opposite of this. But this is what colonialism has also done in capitalism, of like someone outside of you always knows best. And so knowing that that's the condition, and then all of a sudden we're supposed to trust ourselves. And then meanwhile, let's just take a look at, the business world of like, I remember my first coach, I was paying $1,000 a month. I had never paid that much for anything. Like, well, I guess maybe, college education, right? But I handed over all of my power with every dollar because this person knew better, because clearly they were making, almost 7 figures at the time I started working with this individual. And so we start looking for, oh, well, they know better. And we start buying into that narrative. And when we've had experiences, whether there's been a narcissist in your life, I hear a lot of people with whether they were married to one, their parent was one, or they had a primary caregiver or some role model in their life that were consistently invalidating them. No, that's not, like, you're just being too sensitive. That's not real. Like, just come on, pull yourself up, like, stop crying. And when we also look at gender dynamics too, like women are, girls, people raised to be girls can cry, boys can't. And so we start looking at all of this. It's like, so where was I given the message to, one, to learn how to trust myself, and then two, to actually believe what I was sensing when I trust myself? And so self-trust is really at the heart of all of this. And it takes, like, there are layers of healing. It's a practice. It's a practice that we keep doing over and over and over again. And for those of us who we do use intuition in our work, I mean, I've had this experience. I think we've talked about this at one point, Priscilla, where you're like, how could my intuition be wrong? Like, this did not work. And I followed my intuition. And so we have experiences like that. It's like, well, maybe I just cannot trust myself. So to all of that, I will say, just give it time, practice, and again, acknowledging, well, yeah, it makes sense that I might be confused here because I haven't had a lot of practice trusting myself, especially if it's in a new area of your life. It's a new skill set, building that muscle, paying attention to how things feel in your body. That somatic part is really, really important to all of this.
Yes. So we have a minute, but let's try a couple to go
Yep.
through the rapid fire questions, and then we'll tell people where to find you. So question number 1 out of 5, what's your definition of leadership? Just that.
Oh gosh, definition of leadership, creating a community that trusts themselves.
Number 2, what's your leadership edge right now? What's stretching you?
Learning how to accept help.
Number 3, what's your soul fluent leadership archetype from what you can remember, and has it informed or allowed you to embrace more of your natural leadership style?
Divine feminine is my primary, and it's all about community. So yes, that's my MO.
Number 4, what's been your greatest life or leadership lesson that you carry with you?
Learning how trauma impacts everything.
And last question, what's your favorite leadership quality, either in general or about yourself?
I'll go about myself is I value seeing the humanity in people and seeing that there's more than what meets the eye.
And you do that well. And I would also say your curiosity, that little snifferoo, little nose of yours. So thank you so much for being here, for having such a rich, open, and honest conversation. Where can people learn more about your work?
Yeah, so if you go to ANGELLAJOHNSON.com, that's Angela 2 L's. That's my website. And then on social media, Instagram and Pinterest, I'm Angella Johnson Biz. You can find me there.
Yes, and for those, if you choose to share, I'm Priscilla Stephan at PriscillaStephan.com. If you're curious which of the 5 soul fluent leadership archetypes you are, and how to, add more of your innate leadership skills to how you do business in a way that's authentic and true to you, you can go to PriscillaStephan.com/quiz and take the free quiz. Thank you so much for being here. We will share more resources. Remember, you are whole, complete, beautiful, and brilliant. And we hope that, I think I can speak for you, that this conversation has opened you up to new possibilities of that brilliance. And one final word or sentence, like final wisdom, like thing to leave people with.
Yeah, I usually end with this is you're always right on time. So whatever you're discovering about yourself, you're not too late.
Thank you. That's always good to hear. And I will say you're so incredibly brilliant. Lean into that brilliance as best you can. Thank you so much for being here, Angella.
Thank you.